resistance to diseases? Are there ways to mitigate against the inevitable agricultural losses after large storms? So, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of problems that we can fashion and with our limited resources, focus them on our local R&D community to solve. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn how the Universal Service Fund is funded as a tax on cars that come into the country. It was created by the member from East Kingston and Port Royal. In 2015-16, we accrued $1.5 billion from the access fees. In 2016-17, it went down to 1.3. In 2017-18, 972 million. And then for the last fiscal year, 675 million. Mr. Speaker, over a 4-year period, we have had a fall of over 57%. The main reason for this, Mr. Speaker, is that the advances in technology, and I think every individual in here can relate to this. When last have you picked up your phone and dialed a relative abroad? The member from Northeast Manchester. Use WhatsApp, right? You learned how to use WhatsApp. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that more and more, the member from Northwest St. Catherine, who is the founder of the articulate minority, can best tell us. But Mr. Speaker, seriously, you brought cell phones to the parliament. Mr. Speaker, the advances in technology are forcing or encouraging more and more of us to use tools like WhatsApp calling. It means that the revenues coming into the Universal Service Fund continue to decline. And at the current rate, we may not have a Universal Service Fund in another 5 years if the current trajectory continues. There are other sources. There are foreign exchange gains. There are interest income. But the core revenue from the Universal Service Fund is at threat. Mr. Speaker, we are calling for Prime Minister the urgent establishment of a task force to examine the future of the Universal Service Fund and to present answers to some pertinent questions that must be answered. One, what has been the impact of the Universal Service Fund as against the objectives for which it was created? Two, in what ways have the ICT needs of the population changed over the last 14 years? And is the USF the best vehicle through which these needs should be met? Third, does the focus of the USF need to change in order to reflect the current and future needs of the nation's underserved communities? Four, given the current income trajectory of the fund, what are the revenue projections for the next 5 years? And finally, what are the possible alternatives for revenue generation available to continue the viability of the fund? Mr. Speaker, the end result we are trying to arrive at is simple. We need to make an informed determination around whether the purpose for which USF was initially created has been met. If it has been, then we need to ask ourselves whether the USF needs to exist in its current form or any at all, given that it is now operating on deficit financing because it is spending more than it is earning. And in the very near future, its revenues are going to dry up. Mr. Speaker, I would commend to the Prime Minister, he put together a task force for Petrojam. I think there should be collaboration with the opposition, identify private sector partners. Let us do this urgently. It's not a political issue. The same issue would exist whether we were here or there, and I believe it requires urgency if we are to deal with that. Okay. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to how we can provide resources to support our tech entrepreneurs. The minister in her presentation indicated that $200 million would be allocated this fiscal year to support the work of tech entrepreneurs. We support the broad thrust of providing funding support for this group, and we want to offer our recommendations as to what we believe the best way to spend the limited resources are. We believe the best utilization of the funds is to support entrepreneurs who are enrolled in an incubator or accelerator where there is structured support, guidance, and mentorship. The facility doesn't need to be owned or managed by the government, but the entrepreneur would need to apply for entry into the facility and would be selected on a competitive basis based on the solution they have developed and their willingness to be coached and to operate within that environment. There'll be very specific timelines and milestones that would be developed for each entrepreneur, which would differ. It wouldn't be a one size that fits all. And they would have exposure to mentors who would advise them on how they should build and develop their businesses. The objective would be to get the entrepreneur to the stage of developing a prototype that could be pitched to angel investors or venture capitalists, which would then provide an exit for this entity. Mr. Speaker, the disbursements to the entrepreneurs would be done on the achievement of their very specific milestones. So I want to commend to the minister, and again, we have some experience in government where we implemented a similar thing. There was a learning experience. We are willing to sit with the government and share the lessons learned, but we believe and insist that it has to be a structured environment in which the funds are provided. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to what I would term the secrecy around our cybersecurity arrangements. In his last sectoral debate presentation on May 15, 2018, the then Minister of Science, Energy and Technology, Andrew Wheatley, indicated in this House that the government of Jamaica was on the verge of signing an MOU with an Israeli company, Israeli Aerospace Industries, for the establishment of a regional cyber academy. The minister then said that he would be bringing to Cabinet the following week a submission to seek funding for this entity. Mr. Speaker, in November 2018, I tabled questions to the Prime Minister on this matter, and the Prime Minister indicated that no MOU had been signed and that no academy had been established. I further asked the Prime Minister if the government had entered into any agreement or relationship with the Israeli government or an Israeli private sector firm in the area of cybersecurity. The Prime Minister stood up where he was and said that he would not answer that question. Mr. Speaker, we have concerns surrounding the secrecy of the arrangements with the Israelis and the total lack of information around these cybersecurity arrangements. The concerns are based on the following, Mr. Speaker. One, there is a catalog of a history of corruption that has followed Israeli companies who have provided cybersecurity tools to countries across the world. And I can share the information with you. Secondly, the misuse of these tools to spy on opponents, the media, and human rights activists. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to quote from a New York Times article on August 31st, 2018. And the article is entitled, "Hacking a Prince, an Emperor and a Journalist to Impress a Client." And I'm quoting, "As private companies develop and sell cutting-edge surveillance technology to governments for tens of millions of dollars, human rights groups say the scant oversight over the practice invites rampant misuse. And no company is more central to the battle than the NSO Group, one of the best-known creators of the spyware that invades smartphones. 2 lawsuits filed in Israel and Cyprus were brought by a Qatari citizen and by Mexican journalists and activists who were all targeted by the company's spyware. In Mexico, the NSO Group has sold the surveillance technology to the Mexican government on the explicit condition that it be used only against criminals and terrorists. Yet some of the country's most prominent human rights lawyers, journalists, and anti-corruption activists have been targeted instead. Many are now plaintiffs in lawsuits. The government of Panama also purchased the spyware, and the president at the time used it to spy on his political rivals and critics, according to court documents in a case here. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to the Financial Times. an article of May 13, 2019. The title of the article is WhatsApp voice calls used to inject Israeli spyware on phones. This attack has all the hallmarks of a private company known to work with governments to deliver spyware that reportedly takes over the functions of mobile phones operating systems. We have briefed a number of human rights organizations to share the information we can and to work with them to notify civil society. The Israeli Ministry of Defense has ignored mounting evidence linking NSO group to attacks on human rights defenders. As long as products like Pegasus are marketed without proper control and oversight, the rights and safety of Amnesty International staff and that of other activists, journalists, and dissidents around the world is at risk. Mr. Speaker, none of us know whether the Jamaican government has partnered with an Israeli company to provide cybersecurity services here. But there are enough legitimate concerns, Mr. Speaker, about how these companies operate that should prompt the government of Jamaica to be open and transparent about these arrangements. Mr. Speaker, we know billions of dollars have been budgeted for a cybersecurity initiative. We know Israelis are working here in Jamaica with our security forces. Mr. Speaker, I know the argument is going to be that we can't discuss it because criminals will know. I am not asking the government to provide operational details, Mr. Speaker, but I believe we are all entitled to an assurance that the tools that are available to the government are not going to be misused or used in a way that different from its original intent. Mr. Speaker, these arrangements require openness and transparency. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the government if the Jamaican government is a partner or collaborates with the Caribbean Israeli Center for Cyber Defense. This is a center which has as its purpose to provide cyber defense solutions for the Caribbean and to develop the capacity of information technology professions in law enforcement, etc. Mr. Speaker, it's important to know whether we are part of that initiative and the extent of our involvement. Mr. Speaker, let me now finally turn to the area of digital literacy. In her contribution, the Minister made several references to the need to develop a knowledge-based and digital society that sees our people well educated and using their knowledge to drive innovation, entrepreneurship, and to enhance the quality of life. Mr. Speaker, we concur on this objective. The GSMA report entitled Connected Societies, Digital Inclusion in Latin America and the Caribbean identifies the lack of digital literacy and skills as one of the biggest barriers to digital inclusion in the Caribbean. With digital rapidly becoming the dominant mode of interaction for commercial, social, and economic activity, digital literacy and the ability to collect, organize, manage, evaluate, and apply data to various business scenarios and activities is rapidly becoming an essential in demand employability skills. Digital literacy and data skills are no longer a privilege, but have become a universal right for all Jamaican youth. Mr. Speaker, having digital skills and the ability to copy and move a file, send in emails, create electronic presentations should become the norm for our students from primary schools coming into high schools. But it goes beyond that. The ability to work with, analyze, and manage data, information, and digital content, interacting, communicating, and collaborating online using digital technologies, creating and editing digital content in different forms, and the capacity, and most importantly, the capacity for critical thinking and problem solving creatively using digital technologies. Mr. Speaker, we have to be prepared as a country to think and to act big about this challenge.
Mr. Samuel. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member's time be extended in order to enable him to complete his presentation. Those in favor? Those against? Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. Mr. Speaker, as a country, we have to be prepared to think and act big in dealing with this challenge because it speaks to the future of our youth and our future competitiveness as an economy and a society. We have to exercise policy and strategic leadership in this critical area and mobilize key public sector agencies like the Ministry of Education and Health, private sector interests and multilateral agencies around a coherent vision about how we adequately prepare our future citizens for the knowledge-based and digital society. As we contemplate the future of the Universal Service Fund amidst the decline in revenues, its mission and program priorities have to be reshaped and reoriented around the challenge of building digital human capital rather than just building infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in concluding, I have shown how all of us, and I've done it through a pilot which, after we have completed the pilot, I believe it is a tool that all members in here can utilize, how we can deepen and broaden our interaction with our constituents and get them more involved in the development of projects and initiatives. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology has suffered, I don't know if it's called, just a number of the critical initiatives have just been at a standstill. We now have a new minister, but we have lost a year in many of the critical areas. We have to move urgently to protect and define how we move forward with our Universal Service Fund as our revenues continue to decline. We have provided some recommendations on how we believe the resources available to our tech entrepreneurs should be used. We continue to insist on transparency and openness around our cybersecurity arrangements, and we believe that as we move forward in the 21st century, digital literacy skills are a critical component that we must all adopt. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you, members.
Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to request that the member from Central Kingston be allowed to take the resolution at number 5, standing in his name. Mr. Treat.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. On the 28th of September, 2016, more than 2.5 years ago, Mr. Speaker, I moved a motion in this Honorable House, indicated by number 5 on the private member's motion order paper. And I'm grateful to the House Leader for providing the time, albeit 30 months later, for me to introduce this motion. And I trust that similar indulgence will be made available, not only to me, but to other members, so that the full participation of the House on these matters can be entertained. The purpose of my tabling these motions is to promote discussion on important national issues, which do not always or often feature on our agenda as we do particular business or sectional matters. The text of this motion, Mr. Speaker, reads, whereas the development of the agricultural sector is hampered by constraining restrictions, limited availability and high price of capital, And whereas agriculture is the most optimistic growth sector of the Jamaican economy at present, and whereas there are insufficient opportunities for acculturation and training towards a profitable agricultural sector, be it resolved that this Honourable House debate and determine policies which A, will enhance training and expertise in agriculture and agro-processing skills, and B, increase the access of credit to agriculture in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, may I remind honourable members that agriculture provides 7% of our gross domestic product, and when we link it with the agro-processing sector, part of the manufacturing sector, the proportion increases to about 15%. May I remind us also that after periods of impressive growth, during the last year, we achieved only 4% growth in agriculture, and regretfully, for reasons that we are familiar with, the growth has been flat during the first quarter of this year, and because of drought and other conditions, is likely to not achieve even the modest growth of 5%, which the budget anticipated. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a sector which provides somewhere in the region of 200,000 jobs at this time, which provides the bulk of our export earnings. The bulk of our export earnings are related to agricultural production. And very, very importantly, because we are so subsumed in the issue of national security, a vibrant agricultural sector ensures the strength of rural economy, and for that reason plays a very, very significant role in preventing urban blight, preventing the recruitment into gangs, and offers the possibility of sustainable employment for our young people. In the resolution, I indicate agriculture as the most optimistic growth sector of the Jamaican economy. Many will say, but what about tourism? Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, when I look at the figures of retention of earnings in tourism, we always hear about the gross figure, but we seldom hear about the net figure. The net figure is probably south of 30% of our gross earnings. And the only way that we are realistically going to get that to increase so that we have more net earnings of foreign exchange from the tourism industry is by the stimulation of agriculture and the provision of agricultural products to the tourist industry. It's well established. There's no controversy about this. It is the activity and the achievement which has not matched the aim that is involved. Mr. Speaker, let us look then at our young people particularly and some of the constraints that seem to betake them in respect of careers in agriculture. You know, Mr. Speaker, some years ago I went to the Sydney Pagan Agricultural School in St. Elizabeth, and the student body was at the time appeared demotivated. These are people who were being given full board and full education free. And I asked the leaders of the student body what we could do to make the offering more attractive. And the first thing they said to me was that Braze River, where the school is, was too far from Santa Cruz, and that they were having a problem getting their hair and their nails done. So we suggested, yes, they were complaining that they wanted more opportunity and easier time to have their cosmetology needs taken care of. These are agricultural students. Now, I don't wish to berate them, but I have to describe an attitude that all of us better take into account. So we said, fine, we could add cosmetology to the curriculum, eh? It's a useful skill. And then the second suggestion, Mr. Speaker, was that the students found it difficult to wake up in the morning, and could they have the agricultural practice going to the farm only one day a week rather than more? So I said, well, how will the animals and the plants be taken care of? And their reply, Mr. Speaker, was, well, you could hire more ancillary staff, eh? So this caused a certain disquiet and perhaps intemperance on my part. And my reply was, but you eat 3 times a day, don't you? And there was a strong stiffening of the spine among the students, and they said, sir, we are entitled to that. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not entitled to have what we don't produce. It's as simple as that. And there is a debilitating attitude which has all kinds of legitimate roots maybe, but which we need to confront, not in an angry fashion, but in a very positive way to encourage our youth to become more amenable to careers in agriculture. Had another instance, Mr. Speaker. 2 of my sons, one is a triple degree in agriculture, another similarly in philosophy. Introducing them to 2 of Jamaica's businessmen many years ago. And the immediate reply when they knew of their qualifications was pointing to the one with the expertise in agriculture, oh, he isn't the bright one, is he? There is a prejudice that we face, and it is inhibiting the provision of skilled workers to carry agriculture to the kind of high technical, scientific agriculture of which the minister spoke so eloquently in his presentation, and which can inure so much to the increased productivity of this vital sector of our economy. Mr. Speaker, at the tertiary level, the College of Agriculture at Passley Gardens is the premier training institution for agriculture. I wish to encourage government to seriously consider increasing the significance of the quotient of the funds for that institution to a bias in favor of agriculture rather than any of the other disciplines that are there. There is a useful intersection now between the University of the West Indies providing educational degrees at COA, but that needs to be extended to a greater range of agricultural competencies. You know, Mr. Speaker, I think I said this in my sectoral contribution, but Jamaica got shortchanged in 1948, you know, when we ceded the Faculty of Agriculture to Trinidad, when we, along with Belize and Guyana, have the largest landmass and the largest potential for agricultural development. We now have to catch up. My proposal is that as early as possible, the government takes steps to charter the College of Agriculture to be a full-fledged university with proper research facilities. And may I say, affirmative action needs to be taken to ensure that students who opt for agricultural careers receive the requisite support by way of scholarships, bursaries, and affordable loans in order to make up the deficit that we have at this time. Mr. Speaker, the College of Agriculture has important linkages, for example, with the A&M University system in Texas, Prairie View and other campuses, and also with Tuskegee. And we need an intentional effort, which I commend to the Minister of Education, to uplift agricultural education at the tertiary level. We no longer can send our scientists abroad in sufficient number in order to have them certified for Jamaican agriculture. We have something to offer, and it requires a particular activity at this time. May I go further, Mr. Speaker, and suggest that the activities of RADA have to be more centrally connected with our schools. And I want to commend to the Minister of Agriculture. He outlined such an ambitious and impressive program of school nutrition and the school's participation in the nutrition effort. Can we assign some personnel from RADA to the schools to supplement whatever an agricultural teacher can offer? And in order to give practicality and the opportunity for understanding beyond just simply how to plant the red peas or the callaloo, but actually how it can be prepared, how it can be marketed from the earliest stages of education. There's going to be a prejudice on the part of many of our parents. In many instances, I have visited schools, maybe you have also, where parents, once manual labor is involved for their students, say it's not that they send a picnic to school for. But, Mr. Speaker, if we understand the importance of this sector of our society, we have to be far more devoted to the education and the uplift of science in this regard. Mr. Speaker, do you know that of the nearly 40,000 students who took the CSEC examination this year, as it has been in previous years, less than 10% took, even attempted, one scientific subject of pure science? Happily, there are more students who are taking agricultural science now than before. It is considered to be a relatively easy option. But never mind, that is a good start. But more and more, we have to provide incentives to our students and deal with the cultural reticence that they have in respect of engaging in agricultural education. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that these measures involve an articulation between the Ministries of Education and Agriculture, but are absolutely necessary at this time so that we can, in fact, have the required personnel for the agricultural takeoff, which is so essential to GDP growth, to improvements in productivity, and to some basic things like the reduction of that almost $1 billion worth of foreign food that we are importing. Yes, and the preservation of foreign exchange and the earning of more foreign exchange in respect of our export options. I turn quickly to the second limb of the resolution, which is the access, increasing the access of credit to agriculture in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, as one who has been engaged in agriculture since 1973, let me tell you, gaining credit in agriculture is almost an impossibility. Yes, the state of the People's Cooperative Banks, which were the last redoubt in that regard, have unfortunately created now where, Mr. Speaker, they are lending more money to buy car than they are on agriculture.
That's so true.
Kudos to Jamaica National, who have made a provision within their loan portfolio for agriculture. It is unfortunately not adequate. Mr. Speaker, recently, the Bank of Jamaica has bestowed largesse upon the financial institutions with, I don't know how much lower the signal rate can go. What is it? 0.75%. Can some of that largesse be targeted directly? It's the people's money, you know. It's the people's money. It's not for their money. It is the people's money. Can that be targeted towards the stimulation of agriculture? The money that is coming from the Bank of the release reserves. Yes? Otherwise, that too, you know, Mr. Speaker, is likely to end up purchasing car and spare parts and more fuel and bleeding out foreign exchange in a bubble which in fact cannot be sustained unless we have it undergirded by productivity in agriculture. So, you know, it is risky. There's absolutely no doubt about the risks involved, but that cannot be beyond our wit. However, we have to achieve that problem, and I put this forward in order that discourse may follow. Serious discourse. We must use the savings of this country in order to lift up production, and particularly in the area of agriculture and agro-processing. Mr. Speaker, there's one area where the risk can be mitigated. I attended recently, I went to church 2 Sundays ago to preach in the marvelous mid-island town of Kellets, where is a member from North Clarendon. And he pointed out. He wasn't there. He was there. But he's a pillar of it. Mr. Speaker, the point, though, is that the Member of Parliament showed me the impressive planting of tubers and vegetables in the curtilage of Kellets, but made the point that none of the people there have titles. You know, Mr. Speaker, we don't need more law. We need to use the law we have. The Registration of Titles, Cadastral Mapping and Tenure Clarification Special Provisions Act allows the minister to declare any area and to ensure that titles are issued. Successive governments now are making a mistake because when you go and ask for this, they require the same regulations that follow the subdivision requirements, which defeat the will of Parliament and the benefit of the nation. The the provisions of Section 5A2 in that Act, which provide for a covenant to be listed, to be entered on the title, so that the public authorities are not encumbered with the prospect of infrastructure demands later on, and enjoins those who benefit to make contributions at a later stage. This is being ignored. It is the registration of titles, cadastral mapping, and tenure clarification. We've done it, you know, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, right.
We've done it. What we need to do is to use the wisdom and the legislative acumen of our past in order to achieve the objectives of the present. Years ago, former Prime Minister Bruce Golding enunciated public policy that we were going to delink titling from infrastructure. Why have we not done it? We could, if we were to do this intentionally and quickly, we would be in a position where vast numbers of the peasants in a constituency that the Speaker has much familiarity with could have registered titles, could take these to financial institutions, and whereas there might still be difficulty, they would have an asset that is fungible. Instead of dead assets all around Jamaica, which is what the majority of our small farmer, medium-sized farmer, agricultural land comprises, we could have live assets which could then be used for prudential financial purposes. Mr. Speaker, I really commend it to the House. This is an area which brooks no difference across the aisle, and which is quite simply easy and cheap to do. And I'm hoping that this may find some favor with the government. Some will say that there's a problem, because what if you issue a title and it is contested later on? Would you be liable? Mr. Speaker, this is covered in the law. We have an assurance fund, yes, which has been there for the longest time, and it has now formed a dribble into the consolidated fund. Build that up in order that you have the public purse has an insurance policy in the event of contestation. Mr. Speaker, I really feel that this is an area where we can considerably improve and add even more optimism to the focus on this vital sector of our economy. If the issues of improved education and cultural disposition towards agricultural work is taken to heart, and if we improve the access to credit in the ways that I have set out, and other ways that others will advance, it seems to me we could make exponential rather than incremental changes to our GDP, to our export earnings, and to the betterment of rural life. It is to these ends that I commend these remarks to this honourable House, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we want to thank the member for his contribution. The Minister of Agriculture is not able to complete our response to the member today, but next week he will do that. So we're going to suspend the debate until then. In the interim, we have a report from the Ethics Committee, which will be taken now by the member from Southeast St. Elizabeth and Chairman of the committee.
Motion number 38, item 39, item 88. Be it resolved that the report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives and its deliberation on the motion of exemption brought on behalf of Parliament from St. Catherine Southern, which was laid on the table of the House on the 14th day of May 2019, be adopted.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Mr. Speaker, I ask that you recommit, you recommit the items starting with announcement, as we had not done so prior to the public business matters that we attended to today. So I ask that you recommit from announcements down to public business to enable the Minister of Finance to deal with matters, announcements by the clerk, and matters of motions given orally and presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Announcements.
Give everybody. Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Ministry Paper number 24 of 2019 and Parish Courts of Jamaica, the Chief Justice Third Quarter Statistics Report 2018, Criminal Matters. Parish Courts of Jamaica, the Chief Justice's Annual Statistics Report for 2018. The Indicom Second Quarterly Report, April to June 2018. Annual Report of the Micro Investment Development Agency Limited, MIDA, for the year 2017-2018. Annual Report of the National Solid Waste Management Authority for the years 2015-2016, 2016-2017, and 2017-2018. And appropriation account head is 0300, Office of the Public Defender, 2015-2016.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motion given orally. Dr. Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Income Tax Amendment Act 2019.
Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice at the expiration of 21 days that I'll ask the Minister of Education, Youth and Information the following questions.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motions of which... Actually, no, I'm sorry.
Member,
No. Mr. Speaker, I beg to seek your leave and that of the members of this House to allow me to withdraw the motion standing in my name at item number 10 on the order paper, which relates to the third set of regulations for the Public Procurement Act. There has been a slight, these regulations have the detailed forms that suppliers and others involved in the public procurement process have to fill out. Very detailed registration of approved suppliers for grades 1 to 4, registration of public procurement supplier of works for artisans, and the register of approved supplier of goods and general services. Very detailed. And there were a couple of sort of very minor changes to the regulation, to these draft regulations that require them to be withdrawn and retabled. For example, if I'm giving, on page 17, the word contractor was deleted and the word supplier substituted therein. And a change like that requires you can't move an amendment, you have to withdraw it and put it in. And in forms A1, A2, and B, the footnotes with the date references were deleted, and so on. So Mr. Speaker, I seek your leave and that of the members of the House to withdraw the existing regulations, and once I have your approval, I intend to table the new set of regulations, Mr. Speaker.
Is this the wish of the House? The motion that item 10 is now withdrawn. Mr. Samuro.
So, Mr. Speaker, I beg, you have to recommit announcements and notice of motions given orally, given that the regulations have now been withdrawn, so that I can table the new regulations.
The question is that items announcements and notice of motion given orally be recommitted. Those in favor? Those against? As have it. Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House today are copies of the Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulations 2019, and this replaces a document table on April 30, 2019.
Notices of motion given orally. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion: that the Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulations 2019, laid on the floor of the House on this day, as part of the Public Procurement Act, laid on the House of the floor this day, May 28, 2019, be hereby approved.
Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today, so I invite you to adjourn this Honorable House until next week, Tuesday at 2 o'clock, 2 p.m. Thank you very much.
The motion is that the House be now adjourned until next week, Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Those in favor? This House stands adjourned.
Starting January 1, 2019, scandal bags and other plastic bags measuring 24 inches by 24 inches and smaller are banned in Jamaica. Big garbage bags measuring over 24 inches by 24 inches are still allowed. See, when it comes to your garbage, make sure you still bag it and bin it.